Welcome back to the final part in this series. Our small ensuite reno is coming along quite nicely, and in this video it's all getting wrapped up and finalised, which is great as we've got a baby on the way and I think we'll just scrape through in time. In the last episodes we went through demolition, framing, plastering, and in this one you're going to see some waterproofing, tiling, plumbing, electrical and cabinetry, all done by ourselves as we try to add value to our first investment property. So hang in till the end to see what we accomplished by putting in the effort ourselves and also to see what design choices we went for. Okay, first off the bat, I'm going to rewind a little to when I did the floor framing and in particular the shower base. I notched out the new floor joists that I had to put in and I screwed a couple more joists 20mm below the rest of the floor on each side. And that gives us the minimum fall for this sized shower footprint. And with that completed, the flooring could go on top after the waste pipe was in place and the puddle flange was also rebaited into the flooring. Coincidentally, that's my favourite building product to say. Puddle flange. We went with a centre drain position rather than a strip drain, because if we had a strip drain, then we would need to position it at one end. But then the fall would also need to increase, and we didn't really have the room to do that. With all that sorted, I move on to screeding. Screeding is basically a cementitious material that allows you to create a custom fall to the drain in order to then tile over. First, I cut some length of timber to the right size in a wedge shape. These act as a guide for you to make your screed nice and smooth. That bit in the middle is a template piece the same size as the drain cover. So you throw down the screed evenly by hand, and then gradually pack it down and level it off using your wedge strips that you put in there. All up the screeding alone took an hour and a half, so it's not a quick thing, especially if you've never done it before. Later on, after it dries a bit, you take those sticks out and fill those gaps the sticks made with more screed, as they were just a guide to get everything sloping perfectly. Next is the waterproofing. Everything you do is always made better by good preparation, so getting every surface completely clean and free from dust and debris is imperative. You have to start off with a primer, so roll that on everything you're going to be waterproofing. These flexible sleeves are used for any penetrations, such as taps or pipes in the wall, and they aren't cheap. They're around $9 each, but that all adds up if you've got a lot of them. But you do need them, so don't not use them. There are also ones for internal and external corners, and long strips for along any other 90-degree joint. I'm pretty sure there are other ways to do this, but this is one way, and for one reason or another, I saw this as being the best. You have to run your waterproofing 100mm past the actual wet area boundary to be within code in Australia. I've done ours 200mm just to be safe. The product we use required 2 applications 24 hours apart, but check the product you use because it may differ. Okay, onto the tiling, the fun bit. The tile set out is crucial for getting a good looking bathroom. Firstly, everything had to be centered around the drain hole. I'd taken this into account even when I was framing up the floor. Then you don't want any small slivers of tile anywhere, so you need to work that out too. I cut all the tiles with a tile saw and a grinder and mocked them up in position. And this is what it looks like dry fitted. I use Dunlop rubber modified tile adhesive by Ardex. It's kind of what Americans call thin set, but the rubber content improved its workability and coverage. I started from the drain and worked my way outwards, and I also worked my way out of the room so I'm not standing on wet tiles. Make sure you use leveling clips too, because it ensures the edges of the tiles are even with each other so you don't get any lips anywhere. starting with a cut tile at the bottom there. So I've marked out from the top of my shelf line here, I've got my tile trim. That's where the tile's going to start. So that's going to be a full tile. I've worked that out all the way down using my my sticks, my measure out sticks. And yeah, so that's going to be a cut tile down the bottom. And putting all the cut tiles on the bottom first, and then it's a matter of all your full tiles going up from there, and that will meet exactly where I want it to up here. So I started with the cut tiles at the bottom here and worked my way up, and also from the shower screen to the wall. I used a couple of lasers to keep all the tiles level and plumb, and as a general rule I only mix enough adhesive for roughly around an hour of tiling, because after this it starts to harden a bit and becomes a bit harder to apply. I did get plumbers to do the rough-in. I was going to do this myself, but I thought this is probably one thing that I'm happy to outsource. I got them to install mixers and spouts in the shower and vanity, and also remove the side waste pipe on the toilet, as this was just running from the side of the toilet and was visible until it ran out of the wall. So it's now running out through the floor, and I just had to cut out some bricks for the plumbers to run a new waste pipe. The shower niche was a bit tricky, but turned out perfectly. I'd planned it to be exactly 2 tiles high, and the top of it was to be precisely in line with the shelf over the toilet, and also in line with the white tiles on the vanity. Getting everything lined up, especially these days, is a pedantic thing to do, but when you get it right, it just looks so much better. Another thing I learned when I was tiling. I was using 3mm spacers, but then I also used 3mm spacer in the corner as well. And this was a mistake, because when you're caulking, the gaps look so much bigger. So I'd allow like a 1 or 2mm gap, and then the silicone will end up looking like 3mm, if that makes sense. You may notice I've used square shims in a couple of spots in these walls. These spaces I'm using are 3mm, however the tiles are manufactured a bit wonky, as in they aren't perfect rectangles. So I had to use 2mm spacers where I needed to keep the tiles uniform up and down the wall. Here's a cool detail that I wanted to do with the ensuite here. Just with the shaving cabinet, so it's recessed in and it'll come out as well. Now this here's the tile. I'll show you over here. That's the tile aluminium piece that the tiles go up to. Following that around the room along that tile line all the way over here. This is going to be white tiles just from the bench top up to there. And now I didn't want to have, you could end it there and then have a little edge there. I didn't want that. So what I've done over here as well, same thing, is I've put an extra piece of plaster so that's all in line. So what I'm going to do, same thing here. So I'm going to put a piece of plaster. After this was all done, it was coming into winter and I changed one of the downlights with a small heat lamp. That was a mistake. It looks better than one of those old 2 lamp plus light plus fan, but it doesn't create that much heat really. I would opt for a wall mounted heater or underfloor heating obviously if we had the money. The glass panels we installed here are 10mm thick, pretty standard in Australia. We'd found a supplier that had a huge range of off-the-shelf sizes, so we didn't have to get the door custom made, which would have eaten into our budget. The glass just gets siliconed into their channels and sits on small clear bits of vinyl to space them up from the floor to get them level, and also so you can get a good bead of silicone under them as well. Just as a side note, a lot of products we use in this build are off-the-shelf products from Bunnings, Australia's major big box store. Bunnings didn't sponsor this video, but if they did want to reach out, I'd be open to a lucrative deal. Please, message me. Please message me. We went with what they're calling white because we didn't want too much green, and it's a good contrast to both the white walls and the other green tile. problem that I came across was the grout packet instructions were completely wrong. I'd mixed it up and it was way too thick. I basically had to almost pull it all back out of the tiles and water it down to make it a better consistency. So I lost a few hours there. Another thing I will add is that because there were so many small format tiles, I needed so much more grout than I expected. Trimming up the cavity sliding door here, we went with the same architraves that are in the rest of the house, so we didn't have to go change them all. They're okay, not my favourite, but they'll do just fine. Much like the towel rails in the last video, the toilet roll holder I wanted to be sturdy, so added back blocking to that to make it stronger. So check out the last video to see how I did that. Onto the cabinetry. As I don't have an edge bander at home, I got a mate to help out with cutting and edging the cabinet parts at his factory. Cheers, Jace, champion. I then started assembling the base cabinets and drawers, then rebaited out a channel along the bottom near the kicker to house the LEDs, and then wired those up. The LEDs in the cabinet were 3K temperature, which is dim and a warm white colour. And the LEDs were spaced quite close together so you don't get spotting. That's where you see the individual dots rather than a solid light strip. This was more important on the shaving cabinet as you can physically see them from the sides. I went through a couple of different ways you can have the end panels and drawer fronts and decided on the filler and end panel showing at the front rather than sit behind the drawer fronts. And this was basically for symmetry. The other way would have been fine too, but it's not as symmetrical. Just getting the plumbing correct in the base cabinet so that I can do a notch out in this top drawer for the trap. So it'll, for instance on this one, it'll be cut down there, and a big U shape to go over that. So when this drawer is out, it'll just sleeve over that. The drawers we use are Blum Legra box with soft close. These drawers are basically the best you can buy, and I've been using them for years now without any dramas. They often get copied by other brands and even use the same construction holes. This is a good thing for other brands because if they can use the same holes, shops with CNCs don't have to change their drilling operations and therefore are easily interchangeable. I cut up all the drawer box parts to accommodate the P-trap for the sink. And by the way, it's called a P-trap because it's shaped like the letter P, not because you pee in it. Although you could, but you probably shouldn't. Instead of using 3 separate edges, I left the corners of the cutout round and then edged it by heating it up with a heat gun. Then, by using the edge of a screwdriver, I press it into those corners. Then trim it up and reassemble the drawer. We had some spare studs from when we did the wardrobes in the kids' rooms, so I was able to put those to use by making a solid timber benchtop for the vanity and also a floating shelf above the toilet. Now I don't have a jointer, so I used a hand planer and a level to get these straight before running them through the thicknesser and the table saw. Came up well actually. Pop them in clamps and glue them up overnight. You must use a waterproof glue due to this being in a wet area. So I prefer to use Titebond 3 as it's the best and has a longer open time. I like to fill the cracks or gum veins with black filler and then sand them down smooth. They look way better like that rather than trying to match the exact colour of the timber. I actually just use builder's bog mixed with heaps of black stain, and then you need to use a bit more hardener for it to set properly. I used a 6mm round over bit for the edges of the bench top and then sanded it all down to a 320 grit sandpaper. There was a fair bit of work in the shaving cabinet. I wanted to run LEDs around the perimeter, have it hinged and obviously have shelf holes, but I also wanted to have LEDs running down each side on the inside too. But the real estate on the cabinet was too much, so I opted to can the lights inside and actually move these lights to the bottom of the base cabinet instead, which turned out pretty good. So firstly I had to run a rebate around the cabinet. Fit all of the LED extrusions. And miter the corners so they match up perfectly. I popped the back off. Then what I'm doing here is running my cable through the carcass to where the LEDs need to be connected. So I run a notch and then another rebate on the back of the cabinet to the other side where the 240 volt connection is. Solder the wires onto the LED strip. Then masking tape them down so they don't interfere with anything. And a quick test to make sure it's all working before it gets installed. Instead of buying an off-the-shelf cabinet, I made the cabinet a custom size to suit what we wanted, which meant we had to buy a mirror, but then I had to cut a jig with an arch to then use to cut the proper door. The bit on the top here is the proper door with a jig underneath. I then run my router with a bottom bearing to make the final shape on the door. hinges I used were Blum 155 degree soft close in onyx black. Oh yeah! That looks sick! Now I wanted finger pull handles on the base cabinet, so after the doors were cut and edged, I have to cut a beveled rebate into them and then edge them by hand to create this detail. I use strips of matching laminate to do this. These laminate strips are 0.7mm thick and need gluing onto the inside edges of the drawer pull. They take a long time to file down and get perfect, but having this pull detail beats having a handle which would protrude past the bench top and then you'd snag your leg on it all the time. I then cut the holes for the drawer front fixing brackets, fit the hardware, and then I clip them onto the actual drawer base. A bit of fine tuning and they're looking great. Alright, for timber bench tops, it's important that so we've got a fixed timber bench top here. 2 through the front so that doesn't move anywhere. Now with seasonal expansion and contraction, you want it to be able to do that. So I want it to be fixed here so it doesn't move there, but if it needs to do anything, it can go like this. So what I do is cut a slot in there, so I'm going to be putting 2 6mm holes and then drilling it sideways so it's basically a slot, and then using a screw and then a washer underneath. You nip that up so that it's in the slot, and if it needs to move, it can slide with it. And then that's just, that washer is going to slide on underneath of that. It's actually funny, the washers I've been using for a while now are actually a Japanese 5 yen coin because they've got a hole in them and they don't rust. I'm going to add the bench tops, timber bench tops, especially in wet areas. Whatever you do to the top side, so this is a special wet area timber finish. It's like 3 or 4 coats on there. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side, because if moisture gets in on one side and not the other side, it'll bow and cup and do weird things. So you want it to be sealed all around. Do the same finishes, same grit sandpaper on this side as you do that side. And that way it minimises warpage and shrinkage and all that sort of stuff, so keep that in mind. Make sure you use the right product too, don't cheap out on waterproofing stuff, because you don't want to be, this is going to be a sink on there obviously, so water's going to be on it all the time, so don't skimp out on that. I also had to adjust some of the work the plumbers did because the spouts would have come out at an angle, so I had to shim those up slightly so they came out of the wall perfectly. Because I'm pedantic, I also aligned the sink spout to come out directly over the drain, and I think if I had done it off centre, my OCD would have been peaking. The toilet fit off was somewhat straightforward. I did research and YouTube a lot of videos in order to get this right, but this is something I would recommend outsourcing too. Plumbers have just done it a million times, so it would be way more efficient. But in my renovating life, I do want to try to do everything at least once. The metal thing coming out of the wall is just a support so that when you slide your toilet in place, the pipe doesn't wander off. The toilet is held down by a whole lot of silicone and a couple of screws either side. Once the silicone is dry, it's not going anywhere. I then used an endoscope, which I bought off Temu randomly, to check the fitment was okay inside the toilet, and it was perfect. Hitting there, so I can't actually get it on. This should have been a bit longer, so push that out there. I think I might get a grinder and just cut a little nick out of it. If any water's going to come up, it's going to come up and piss over there anyway, under there, so up there I don't think it's going to matter. Oh, look at that. Done the job perfectly, not touching the toilet at all. Good, happy with that. I'll put some thread tape on that and tighten it up. Now I love how this shower came out, but there's one thing I would change. We bought a rain head shower spout, but you can't get out of the way of the water. You can move it side to side, but it's basically on your head the whole time. Maybe the size of the shower is too small for this type of head, but I think I'd go back to a wall-mounted one. I'd also add a handheld sprayer, not only for yourself, but also to wash the shower down. Should be able to shower in that tonight. Okay, so the final cost of the entire ensuite came to $6,660.29. This included absolutely everything. Sliding door, all timber, paint, tiles, waterproofing, plumbing supplies, fittings, glass, cabinetry, electrical and plumbing. I think that's absolutely ridiculously cheap for a bathroom. So that's it for this room, and thanks so much for watching. We hope you got some information out of it that you can use in your project. We'll be doing more videos on specific things we did in this series if that interests you, plus more on our whole renovation process on this property. Feel free to subscribe if you haven't already. Let us know what you think in the comments.